The international system is facing accelerated transitions as competition between the great powers intensifies. Join this important dialogue with the Kingston Consortium on International Security.
All right, and without further ado, I'd invite Dr. Stéphanie Martel, Director of the Center for International Defense Policy at Queen's University, to offer her opening remarks and the challenge to conference. Madame.
Thank you, Mike. General officers, senior officers, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends of KCIS, it is my genuine pleasure to welcome you to this edition of the Kingston Conference on International Security. I'm grateful to the Elder for making time this morning to come and perform the welcome to the territory for us. Let us acknowledge that we are gathering today on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and that we are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. And of course, the significance of the land is no secret to anyone interested in unpacking the dynamics of war, changing or unchanging. The desire to assert control over land and the populations inhabiting it is very much part of what makes the conduct of war unchanged and still so prevalent today in Ukraine and elsewhere. That same impulse is also reverberating into other spaces, from the cyber domain to outer space and the deep sea. We have a collective responsibility in questioning the root causes of this reality if we're ever to develop effective solutions to address or possibly even prevent war. My hope, and I think it's a very realistic one, given the impressive list of bios and names of speakers that you can find in the program before you, is that this conference will serve as an opportunity to do exactly that. I'm thankful to the panelists, moderators, and esteemed keynote speakers who are volunteering their time and to share their expertise this morning. I'm honored to be leading a research center that is in such a good position to bring a diversity of audiences together, acting and retired members of the military, different agencies and levels of government, experts with different perspectives on security and defense, students, and members of the Kingston community. On a personal note, as many of you know, this edition also marks the first KCIS I have the honor to preside over as CIDP Director. I have, of course, had the pleasure to benefit from the knowledge gathered at KCIS as a member of the audience in previous editions, but I will admit that having a first seat backstage and witnessing the program coming together over months of hard work has been an illuminating experience. And I certainly learned a lot since my appointment started, and I'm still learning. I'm immensely grateful to our partners for their ongoing commitment to this important event, and I look forward to continuing this fruitful collaboration moving forward. Grateful to the Canadian Army Command and Staff College, but also our international partners, the US War College and NATO's Defense College, for this edition. This event would not be possible without such partnerships. And we would look forward to working with the Canadian Defense Academy and the Canadian Forces College, in particular, on KCIS moving forward. I also want to acknowledge the sponsorship of the Dallaire Center of Excellence for Peace and Security, who is shepherding the first panel of the day. This year's KCIS benefited from the generous contribution of the Department of National Defense through its Mobilizing Insights in Defense and Security initiative through a grant acquired with the help of colleagues Stephanie Von Lackey and Kim Nossel, as well as a fantastic duo of talented student researchers, Morgan Fox and Owen Wong, who is in the room. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the important contributions of my predecessor in this role, in the role of CIDP Director, the Honorable Hugh Segal, who sadly left us in August. Hugh was a pillar of the Queen's community. He played a key role in the last iteration of KCIS and in initiating this one, actually, in addition to a much broader list of contributions to the center, to Queen's University, and to his country. His absence is felt deeply from coast to coast, and in Kingston, his home in particular. Last but not least, in a long list of thanks, I'm especially grateful to the wonderful and experienced team at CIDP for making this event a reality. As a new director coming into KCIS planning as it was already underway, I can say with confidence that this event would not be happening without the excellent and professional coordination of Howard Coombs, Associate Director of CIDP, the work of Maureen Bartram, CIDP Manager, and Brian Houtman, Communications Coordinator, as well as the many students and interns who are providing much needed support. So the credit for every positive you take away or witness in the upcoming days goes to them first and foremost. If you see some of them running around, please still consider taking a second to shake their hand and thank them. Anything less positive, you can blame on me. Part of my task this morning is also to present the challenge to the conference. International security is at a tipping point where, after a period marked by the prospects of a peace dividend and a lot of complacency, conflict, and not merely the prospect of war, but its reality, seems to be back with a vengeance. The so-called West has come to the realization that it is not insulated from the risk of open, violent conflict on its soil. The war in Ukraine is, of course, a primary manifestation of this unchanging reality, but growing concerns around homegrown terrorism and radicalization from the far right, among other groups, foreign interference with deadly consequences on Canadian soil, as well as our continuing struggle as a society to properly address what can be described as an ongoing war against Indigenous women and girls, among many other examples. And this underscores the need to come to grasp with the fact that war, conflict, violence are not merely a foreign phenomenon unfolding out there, but one that strikes home too. And of course, members of the military in attendance are acutely aware of the ways in which war, even when it unfolds far away, is also brought home. The theme of this year's conference is meant to acknowledge that while war remains a fundamental aspect of human life across the world, making it in many respects an unchanging reality, it is also morphing into something new. The way in which war and conflict more broadly is practiced by states and other actors is also changing in fundamental way. As a result of technology, from facial recognition by drones to hypersonic defense systems, cyber attacks, quantum. Don't expect any more details from me on any of the technical stuff, as I eagerly await, like many of you, to be enlightened by our panelists on their implications for both the practice and prevention of war over the next 2 days. Faced with these new realities, on top of remnants of a very old phenomenon called power politics, compounded by wicked problems like pandemics and climate change, the sense that we are in a moment of polycrisis is ever present. As we gather to think about international security and the specific problem of war as it unfolds in 2023, my challenge to this conference is to not only to encourage us to think about the complex and multifaceted causes of conflict in this day and age, but also to find, and this is becoming harder and harder, but sustain glimpses of hope still in our ability to not only prepare for war, but prevent conflict, both abroad and at home, preventing tensions from worsening and hopefully preventing future wars. Deterrence is but one way to do this, and although it is especially challenging in times such as these, we should not forget our responsibility in fostering conditions for increased collaboration and cooperation, including in defense and security, in order to address both changing and unchanging dimensions of war. Through the renewal and expansion of commitments to long-standing partnerships, to the development of new partnerships, not only with the usual suspects or like-minded, as well as the development of new rules and norms in domains where the risk of conflict is especially acute and yet very much unregulated. So I invite you to keep these broad considerations in mind as you learn from our experts today and tomorrow and connect with each other. That's part of the building partnerships and collaborations too, right? And this conference is the right venue to do this. So thank you, and on behalf of CIDP and the KCIS Consortium, I wish you all a wonderful, productive conference.
All right, we're ahead of schedule. It's pretty good. Good start. So we're going to start with the opening keynote. I would invite Dr. Stephanie Von Lackey from Queen's University to join us at the front. Done.
Colonel Bavin, merci. Merci pour l'intro. Wow, I'm so happy to see all of you in this room, and it's wonderful to be back at KCIS on a beautiful, sunny September day. I'm thrilled to be up here. I'll say first a few words in my capacity as the Associate Dean of Research for the Faculty of Arts and Science right here at Queen's. And I just want to salute this partnership. This partnership that underpins KCIS is exactly the kind of partnership we want to see across the university. You know, joining together government, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, experts from our allies and partners, academics, and providing also an inclusive environment for our students as they get acquainted with the field of security and defense. So I really hope that this partnership will continue to flourish in the long term as it has for the past 2 decades. And I thank everyone who's traveled far and wide to attend in person this very important conference. I want to salute also Dr. Martel's intellectual leadership and fantastic challenge to the conference. Thank you for setting some of the parameters for the debates and presentations that'll unfold today and tomorrow. I'm really happy to be here to listen in. It's wonderful to be here as a guest and participant this year. And now on to the honor of presenting the keynote this morning, a very important opening keynote. Thank you, Senator Patterson, for being here with us. You were there yesterday evening to mingle with the conference attendees, and it's so wonderful to have you kick things off at KCIS. I'll start by saying that after 34 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, Senator Patterson is the first CAF woman veteran to be appointed to the Senate of Canada. And within the military, and upon her promotion to flag officer, she was the first person with a military nursing background ever to lead at that rank. So a lot of firsts, and I've been a witness to her really incredible career trajectory. We've crossed paths many times in a professional capacity, and I've just seen Senator Patterson's just dedication to improve military health care, but also to create a healthy work environment in the Canadian Armed Forces. So thank you very much for that. She has served as the defense champion for women, addressing sexual misconduct and leading culture change efforts in the Canadian Armed Forces, and has commanded Canada's 14th health system, the Canadian Forces Health Service, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can see how those experiences might shape her insights today as we talk about war, conflict, and more specifically about human security themes. So I think that experience will really shine through. I'll mention that among her many other awards and recognitions, Senator Patterson was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada in 2014 and inducted as an officer in the Order of Military Merit in 2018. And I'll just stop there because I was told by Colonel Babin not to go too far into the biography, but this is our opening keynote, so I think a few biography highlights are warranted. So I'll stop there and really ask you to welcome Senator Patterson to the podium. I think that her unique insights as senator, parliamentarian, and as a senior CAF leader are going to be really incredible to listen to and to really set the stage for the 2 days that lay ahead of us. So the podium is yours, and I'll be right by your side up here.
So good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to try and use my iPad. So if this goes wrong, I'll ad lib, which apparently is what I'm supposed to do in my new job. So good morning to everybody. And it is such a distinct honor to be here at the consortium because this matters here. This is who I am. And certainly as my career has continued, it's where I wish to continue to situate myself. So I think to start, I have to let you know that I consider myself a generalist, like many senior officers, rather than an expert in the field of conflict and security, and certainly in comparison to so many of you who are here today. However, after 34 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, including time as a senior leader, I think this has also afforded me a unique perspective as a parliamentarian because I've lived, I've worked, and I've served in the defense environment. So as a parliamentarian, as a newly minted, and I'm going to give you a little bit of who the Senate is, because I bet you may not be tracking half this stuff. But I'm an independent senator. I'm appointed by the King, not the government, by the King, upon the recommendation of an independent, arm's-length, nonpartisan panel and the Prime Minister of Canada. So I continue my service to Canadians, but now with a constitutional platform from which I can give the voice of defense and security issues, and for serving members and for veterans. And I can act as a convener to help bridge that chasm that we see between the political space and the defense environment. And I realize I have to raise this up or I'm going to have a neck strain when I'm done. So bear with me here. It's about adapting. So, pardon me. Nope, that's not going to work. The acute angles of war. All right. So, with all of this in mind, where I currently come from, I feel very humbled to be asked to give your keynote this morning. And I'm also very aware that this year's conference theme is the unchanging character of war. We all know that as long as humanity has existed on this earth, so too has conflict. And as humans have connected globally, so has conflict. And humanity has created communities, and this has led to the creation of states. And historically, we have always perceived conflict through the lens of security of the state, which is mentioned this morning. So, writing in the Canadian Military Journal in the fall of 2022, Dr. Alan Okros stated, "State security views the state and state interest as the principal objectives of attention, grounded in considerations of territorial integrity, and this orientation emphasizes military defense of state interests and prioritizing the protection of borders, peoples, and values against threats that emanate from abroad." End of quote. While Dr. Okros was writing in reflection of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he could easily, yep, and here goes the iPad, he could easily have been referring to any number of global conflicts stretching back hundreds of years. So looking back at the various colonial conflicts of the 18th and 19th centuries, whether it be Napoleonic Wars or even the First World War, it was certainly a state-centric approach to conflict. And that state-centric approach also led to the tenuous peace that was established afterwards. And wherein states, having become empires, engaged in conflicts with one another for global dominance, though let's see if it ever took into account the human costs of war or the very people that not only executed war, but were subjected to that very war. And how many treaties, for the historians amongst you, of perpetual peace, isn't that fabulous, perpetual peace, have graced our history books since 1502? A whole bunch. And I bet that both King Henry VII and the VIII could tell us a few things about the concept of state security and this perceived value of perceptual peace in order to reign with power. And like those earlier conflicts, the current conflict in Ukraine shares another common theme of state power, and that is the potential for authoritarianism. When we focus solely on state security, we risk the rise of authoritarianism, even in a democracy, because if the state becomes the only matter to be secured, it becomes overemphasized at the expense of the people that the state is actually expected to protect. So therefore, I think we need to look at this human security framework as a complementary and next evolutionary step in the entire security architecture. But it doesn't mean that we no longer focus on state security. But what we need to find is where is that intersectional inflection point that allows us as leaders to integrate concepts surrounding thinking around traditional state security to include this concept of a human security framework. And so my remarks today will focus on human security and what should be done to change to better address the increasing insecure national and global environment we find ourselves in. So like any good person, I'm going to ask you, what is human security? And what does it actually mean? So we know that there is no real consensus on the definition of human security. You know, different countries, different bodies are going to look at it differently. But the United Nations frames it as a multi-sectoral approach to security that identifies and addresses widespread challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of people. And from a national security perspective, applying a state-centric approach, we can understand what survival means, the continued existence of a population. Because really, if there are no people, what are we securing and who's securing it? And so using that same approach, if we view livelihood through an economic lens, livelihood is the sustainment of the means of wealth and economic production for the state. And it also seems to be supported with where NATO is going in terms of its approach to human security, which embeds considerations for comprehensive safety and security of populations into all stages and levels of peace and security operations. And if you think about it, it's very consistent about what we talk about in the Women and Peace and Security framework, which will also be discussed in the next couple of days. But let me go back to about people. What about the dignity of people when we look at all of these human security frameworks? So how do we as state actors protect and uphold human dignity as an essential element of any human security framework? To do so, I think we need to look deeper into the concept of human security and look at the 7 proposed elements of that framework. So just to recap, we think they're economic security, political security, food, environment, personal, community, and health security. And of course, in a keynote, you don't have time to focus on all these different areas. So as you heard from my history, my background as a former commander of Canadian Forces Health Services, my extensive experience as a nurse and in the clinical domain, I think I can say I have enough experience from healthcare to use this as an example to frame my comments about what human security can mean in the overall architecture. I want you to think about yourselves, because after all, health, or lack thereof, is something that each and every one of us experiences. I call it a great equalizer. There's nothing else you can really put your finger on in this country except for taxes that every single one of us experience. Health crosses all intersections of identity of every Canadian, whether it be race, ethnicity, culture, sex, gender, sexual orientation, age, social, economic, demographics. These are just a few. So I'm going to use the concept of health security as a great example of a domain of human security framework, what it means to Canadians and confidence. Because health is not just about survival of the state's population, it's also a basic need for us to thrive as a society, healthy systems. We know and have seen that threats to population health, like pandemics, don't recognize international borders. So simply put, we've all seen that population health and domestic health security can have international security implications and could destabilize confidence in rules-based order, domestically, internationally, and ultimately the trust in governments and institutions that are responsible for the people. Domestically, in Canadian context, the current heated discussions around health, healthcare, health systems is not just about securing the health of the people. This is where it ties into human dignity and the frameworks I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to be honest, is that this debate is ripe for exploitation and politicization for actors who wish to take advantage of this opportunity to destabilize who we are as Canadians. Canadians from coast to coast to coast, rightly or wrongly, pride themselves on this concept of universal access to health care. And I propose that they see it as a Canadian value. We fight for values. But there's a growing lack of confidence in the healthcare system, but truly it's about the government's ability to deliver care. I say again, the lack of confidence is ripe for exploitation by both benign and nefarious actors. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, there was and continues to be plenty of misinformation and deliberate disinformation about things like proper treatment for COVID-19, the efficacy and effects of vaccines, and the needs for public health measures. We also continue to see other shortcomings and choke points in healthcare systems that are collapsing under this burden in Canada that not only delay or even deny access to Canadians, but we also have to note that this delay or denial of access to healthcare is particularly felt by racialized and economically disadvantaged people and women. Again, Canadians see universal access to healthcare as a key cultural value, and it's become very much a public institution in Canada, not just a policy or an action of government, but truly as an aspect of Canadian state and Canadian identity. And as much as I believe lack of confidence in healthcare is symptomatic, I also believe it's demonstrative of a larger crisis, a crisis in confidence of governance in Canada, an essential requirement for a secure state. And I'm not talking about the usual complaints about the political actors and legal leaders that form government. I'm talking about the actual undertaking of governing. And it's not unique to Canada, as some of our international partners are well aware. I referred earlier to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As part of that invasion, Russian efforts to spread misinformation and disinformation via social media platforms are finding willing audiences in Canada. And they are particularly felt in those marginalized who feel that institutions of the state are not working for them. Those actions feed not just the domestic crisis of confidence in governance here in Canada, but they also serve to chip away at global rules-based order upon which human security relies. Modern warfare is hell. Skepticism of organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and others by local populaces is nothing new. But the increased vitriol and adversarial styled us versus them mentality that has become more commonplace is very worrisome as it erodes Canadians' confidence in our state. And we know it's not just Russia that seeks to disrupt global rules-based orders. Canadians need to know that the state and the international rules-based order is not working against them, even if sometimes they feel it isn't working for them. So how do we address this, and how do we try to restore confidence in governance amongst Canadians? So my suggestion is that we reimagine a whole-of-state approach to government. What you say? That already exists. Stand by. All of us here today are familiar with the concept of a whole-of-government approach, right? Well, no, yeah, got that. Whole-of-government approach, where in an ideal world, I'm going to pick some ideal world, a policy objective that is a priority across government, whether that be federal, provincial, municipal, is a priority that's going to be coordinated seamlessly and sustainably across multiple cycles of government and across all departments and agencies. But I think everyone here knows that that is not the case, with defense policy being one of those chew toys right now that we see tossed around through each election cycle. Whole of government is an attempt to honestly break down the silos that exist within government, and it is theoretically a useful approach in dealing with certain aspects of government. But we need to move beyond being concerned about government and concentrate on governance of these processes. People, Canadians, often conflate government and governance too easily and too often. Government is narrowly focused and is often self-interested and self-motivated within its own jurisdictional order, because government, with a capital G, proper noun, is really only federal or provincial cabinet and the bureaucracy that supports it. If we approach governance with an all of state institutions involved, from policy to sustainable action, perhaps we'll be able to rise above the partisan snipping and government reaction that has become all too common in our political environment. My concept for this whole of state approach would include a federal parliament, which is both the Senate and the House of Commons, and the various legislative assemblies, the courts, the provinces, the territories, and importantly, the Crown's partners, the First Peoples of this land. And we will also include state tools that exist outside a political government, like the RCMP and the Canadian Armed Forces. So this is why we need to start addressing state and human security with a revitalized, integrated, whole-of-state approach. Again, using health as an example to illustrate. A whole-of-state approach to healthcare and health security as a pillar of human security framework in Canada would bring to bear all the institutions of state to address the issues we see today, including confidence in government. I'm going to go back. Every single Canadian experiences health or lack thereof. But how do we start with a whole-of-state approach? At the outset, I said that my remarks would include what I, as a senator, could influence in the emerging human security domain. The Senate, as a state institution, could be that incubator for a whole-of-state approach that I'm advocating for today. Let's look back at history. The creation of the Senate itself can be seen as a response to a crisis in confidence in governance as it existed in the 1860s. The appointed nature of senators with constitutionally protected tenure was meant to be a check on what could be the partisan excesses of the elected House of Commons. I'm just giving it the benign look. We know it was more than that. But the Supreme Court in 2014 opined that the Senate was endowed with independence from elections, and I quote, in order to remove senators from the partisan political arena that required unremitting consideration of short-term political objectives. The Senate also has the advantage as a potential incubator for new whole-of-state approaches and ideas because it's also a compromise of representation. Think back to women, peace, and security and whose voices you're meant to hear. One of the artifacts of the Senate is that it's built on regional representation. And while it is somewhat skewed today because it's always a numbers game, it has acted as a bulwark against smaller provinces and linguistic minorities from being overpowered and swamped by the control of larger voices and larger groups. So in short, the Senate is a compromise that gave us confederation, but today the evolving nonpartisan Senate includes a wider diversity of representation and expertise in various professions and domains, and it includes defense and security, though it's a very small cadre, I can guarantee you that. The Senate is also not restricted to regions or the minorities of only the 1860s. It now also includes 3 northern territories critical to Arctic security considerations, which are otherwise not protected constitutionally as creations of federal legislation. There is a growing number of Indigenous peoples being appointed to the Senate, as well as more racialized and new Canadians, and the Senate has 48 women members at a total of, I think we have 92 as of yesterday, sitting senators of 105 positions. While I may be only one of those 92 senators, I do see myself as a convener of people in the defense and security environment and a voice for those who serve, those that did, and of their families. And I talked about the chasm that exists between the political arena and the defense environment. So now let me focus on examples of where a new whole-of-state approach could better address policy and operational challenges that we're facing in the defense and security sector in Canada. To start, there's an ongoing debate about what is the role of the Canadian Armed Forces today. Defense policy papers come and go, change. But it's also my view, and many in this room, that the CAF is first and foremost a defense and security tool of the state. Soldiers are not firefighters, sailors are not snowplow drivers, and aviators are not first responders. Yet the Canadian Armed Forces continues to be called upon in these roles in crisis, which is every month. And they will continue to perform exceptionally, and they will do their duty to king and country without question and hesitation, and we want to be there for Canadians. But to be transparent, I acknowledge that I do have immense privilege as a senator, and I'm going to go back with my little catch here. There's only been about 1,000 senators in Canadian history, or less than 1,000 senators in Canadian history, who've been asked. So for me, I feel I don't just have a constitutional right to speak up for defense and security, but I also have a duty to use this extremely privileged platform as an advocate for real change in policy. So when I speak, I'm not just tossing buns from the cheap seat, taking cheap shots. And that I also recognize that with great privilege of both my former rank and my current position comes immense responsibility to use that power and privilege responsibly and in the best interest of Canadians. As what I'm calling part of the all-of-state approach, I feel there's a need for the establishment of a civilian-led Canadian Emergency Response and Management Agency, a name we had to pick out because there wasn't one, but run by the federal government as the lead order of government beyond policy and into action. Such an agency would be tasked to help in areas that we all know, such as responding to climatic events, such as wildfires, flooding, pandemics, and other outbreaks. They would be able to easily leverage non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross, coordinate with provincial governments and agencies in providing assistance and emergency benefits to Canadians. A coordinated all-of-state approach via such an agency has the potential to alleviate the operational pressure as well as human and other resource challenges that the CAF faces today, so that the CAF can concentrate on that core mandate that no other Canadians do, the defence of Canada at home and abroad. So all this to be said, in a state-centric view, access to military power is a basic need for state security. There are others that can proudly take on some, and maybe most, of these other domestic roles that the CAF sees themselves engaged in right now. And without state security, going back to the raison d'etre, as a foundation, there is actually no hope for human security in a modern world. There's no denying that there is a symbiotic relationship, both state and concept of human security must mesh. I've tried to circle back to my remarks and what I can do as a senator and effectively use the platform that I have. But truth be told, every single one of you here today has a platform in a democratically elected country that allows free thought and free expression. So I'm also going to put down a challenge to you. How are you going to use your platform in this complex security environment to make meaningful change for Canadians? And so as you ponder that, I'd like to leave you all with one last thought. This year's theme of this conference is the unchanging character of war. The question may not be whether it is or isn't changing. Maybe it's how our perceptions of conflict are changing. Are states moving beyond security being just about the assurance of societal and economic survival? Is humanity ready to conceptualize and protect human dignity and humans' ability to thrive ahead of all else? Because to be honest, we cannot do that or achieve any of these aims without human security. Thank you.